Okay, right. It's been a minute, guys. I know I've been away for a little while, but it's good to be back. It's the part-time trader, and today we're going to be taking a look at the charts to see what technical analysis is telling us about the state of global markets and why, for me, this is such an interesting time to be an investor, because I believe there are signs that we are on the precipice of a huge blow off top, particularly in US and Chinese equities. If you're interested to find out how I'm planning to play the markets over the next 6 months, how I plan to profit from what I think will be a period of insane gains, if you get it right, then please do stay tuned. Lots to come over the next kind of 45 minutes. Remember, none of this is financial advice. I'm a random guy on the internet that offers you lines on a chart, but I suspect if you stay tuned, you will find some of this informative, entertaining. And if you do, please hit the subscribe button, help me grow the channel, and also follow me over on X through @PartTimeCharts. So let's get straight into it. And today we're going to kick off with the Hang Seng Index. So I have been saying for quite a while now that this, for me, is the key chart in global markets. And the reason is that I love how clean some of the technicals on this are. First of all, you've got this trend line that has acted as resistance and support dating all the way back to the 1980s, and we got a breakdown of that trend line in 2022, and ever since then price has been holding under. And what's been really interesting the last couple of years, obviously US equities have done incredibly well, and we've seen new highs on the S&P, on the Nasdaq, many of the equities that we know and love in that space, like Meta and Netflix and Amazon. Google's done really well recently. But what's interesting is that during that period of time, Chinese stocks have been languishing. So we haven't seen any kind of momentum behind Chinese stocks. The US market is absolutely dominated. And this breakdown seems to have held as resistance 2 or 3 times since we broke down in 2022. And I've been saying that if you want a sign of an incoming blow off top on equity markets, if you want a sign that the bears, including myself, are early and that we're likely to see much higher prices in the equity markets, then what you want to see is a reclaim of this huge trend line on the HSI and a reclaim of this really key support and resistance zone here. And lo and behold, over the last couple of weeks, we've had both of those things. And I believe this downtrend resistance is going to be broken soon and price is going to balloon. I genuinely think we could see the price of something like the HSI double over the next 6 to 12 months. I think we're going to get the kind of rapid price action in US equities that we saw post-COVID. And I think what that probably means is a devaluation of some of the major global currencies as the debt crisis continues to take hold. And in the short term, that will be really bullish for equities. Now, look, I've got to be honest. I mean, anybody that's followed me for a while knows that this hasn't been my position. I have been a big bear, probably for about 9 or 10 months now. Called the top on the markets at the back end of last year. Obviously, we saw a huge dip in early 2025, and I was feeling pretty smug, pretty proud of myself. But what's happened since then is that markets have boomed, and this is no longer, in my view, this is no longer looking like a sort of bounce before the real top comes in. I do believe that this bounce is likely to be sustained, not for a really long period of time, but a short window in which you're going to see the kind of climactic price action that took us to a blow off top in 2000, for example, or in 2007-8 in Chinese markets. The kind of move that you see here, where in the period of 3 to 6 months, you just get this kind of vertical price action and you see 50, 60, 70% gains in something like a major index like the HSI. So technically, this is looking really, really good for me. And when I think about where else can I find clues, because as I've always said, the market is a jigsaw, and your job as a technical analyst is to piece that jigsaw together and try and work out, when I look at the charts side by side, when I look at the market as a whole, what does it tell me about the direction that we're heading? So the first clue is that we are now starting to see, I think this descending broadening wedge is about to break to the upside. that means that we are at the beginning of a big move rather than at the end. This is not the time to be flipping bearish, particularly on Chinese stocks in my view, and I think we're likely to see prices go much, much higher. But there are a couple of other clues in that space. So this is NIO, which is a Chinese electronic car manufacturer. It is listed on the Nasdaq, so it's US listed, but it's a Chinese HQ'd company. And you can see here that we are witnessing a major breakout on the weekly or the 2 weekly chart in this case. You know, we've had this long period of consolidation for close to 2 years now, going back to the beginning of 2024. Price has been locked in this range, and now we're starting to see not just a breakout to the upside of this range, but also a really definitive breakout, a break of this downtrend, this kind of top line here that has been capping price all the way back to the beginning of the 2022 crash that we saw in markets. And again, while the Nasdaq and US equities have been putting in new highs, something like NIO has basically just been frustrating investors for the last couple of years. Everything else has been booming, but this has just been stuck in a sort of downward spiral, sideways action in this range. And now we're starting to see some real signs that positive price action is on the way. And you can see this is my forecast for price action over the next, I think, 6 to 12 months. And I know that feels like a crazy period to be projecting the kind of gains that we're talking about here. Potentially, if we head back to the previous highs, we're talking about something like a 9 or 10x move from where we are today, which is crazy. But we have seen this kind of price action before. And this price action began back here. We saw a similar sort of breakout from a downtrend. And post-COVID, the money printing machines were turned on. And we saw stocks like NIO shoot rapidly to the upside. And in the space of, 7 or 8 months, you saw a move from the breakout to the top of the market of about 1,400%. So incredible gains had in a very short period of time. And I believe there are signs that the market is heading in a similar direction now. And I certainly wouldn't be looking to short something on a breakout of this magnitude after such a long period of consolidation down here. And Alibaba is another stock that I really like the look of. And I've been saying for a while that while price was down in this sort of range here, if we look at the monthly chart how clean this is, we were stuck for quite some time between this resistance and support zone here and this resistance zone here. Price has reclaimed, but I've always said that for me to be really bullish on Alibaba, I'd need to see a break above the blue level, and now we've got that definitively. This, in my view, this is not going back under this blue level. The only way I would get bearish on this is if we got something like this red squiggly line where price fell back under, and that would be a sign to get out. But if I'm looking at building a spot bag, this looks like an incredible opportunity. From here to previous all-time high, you're talking about close to 100% move, and I believe that it's possible that Alibaba goes even higher than that. But cautiously, these are the two zones where I would be thinking about taking profit if I were in Alibaba and trading this. But again, these kind of gains in a relatively short period of time, which is what I'm projecting, don't come around very often. So to me, the market looks incredibly exciting right now. I think there are big moves on the horizon, and I got to be honest, it's a crazy time to be an investor because all the signs are there that the economy is weakening. We've seen incredible gains already over the last couple of years, particularly in US equities. So to think that there is more upside to come, that there might be explosive moves both in Chinese equities and also in small and medium cap US equities is really exciting. And although I've been bearish for pretty much all of 2025, I haven't really missed much because some of these opportunities, something like NIO, we're only just getting the breakout now. And some of these, if you're on the right side, I genuinely believe they're going to be life-changing over the coming sort of 6 months to a year. Obviously, you have to do your own research. None of this is financial advice. But for myself, I'm looking at these charts and I'm thinking I've got really clear invalidation here. We're back above the accumulation range high. We have broken this downtrend. If price were to pop back under here and we start getting weekly closes beneath this sort of $6 level, then I would question myself on this investment and probably start to de-risk. But for now, the risk return on something like this is absolutely massive. So NEO is one that I'm really interested in. But there are other signs too that we're heading into some sort of blow off top phase in the market, and one of those is that this 100-year trend line that has capped price on the S&P, the S&P 500, the sort of biggest and most prominent index in the entire world, has broken. And so I've been wrongly, clearly predicting that this would mean the top of the market and that we would potentially come back at some point to revisit this lower channel or lower boundary of this channel. But now I'm looking at it and I'm going, you know, when I piece everything together, when I look at the price action on the HSI, the fact that Chinese stocks are breaking out, that we're seeing that in NEO and Alibaba, and then I look at the S&P and I see this, I think this is no coincidence, guys. It's not a sort of random freak occurrence that goes against everything else I'm seeing in the charts. If anything, this is confirmation that we are likely to see markets go vertical at some point in the very near future. And so if I was thinking about trading US equities in particular, how would I be doing that? Well, look, this is the Nasdaq versus gold chart, and I've posted this a few times on X, and I've been toying with, on the one hand, you know, this looks like a big sort of rising wedge pattern which has broken down, as we saw earlier in this year in sort of March 2025. On the other hand, you know, while we have broken down and the Nasdaq has depreciated versus gold, we also have such clean price action on the upper and lower boundary of what might potentially be some sort of descending broadening wedge, which would mean that any sort of reclaim of this level here, which looks key from a sort of price action perspective. You know, we've seen support has given way. We've back tested it as resistance, but were we to come back up and reclaim this, I think that would be the first sign that the Nasdaq is likely to do really, really well against gold over the coming period. And were we to go even further than that, so were we to reclaim this level, that would be the first sign for me. But were we to come up and reclaim this downtrend and reclaim this uptrend and then break this downtrend that completes the move out of this descending broadening wedge, I think that would be hugely, hugely promising for bulls on the Nasdaq, and would potentially mean, if we zoom out, would potentially mean that we're heading for the previous high back here, which marked the top of the big bubble in tech stocks that formed over the 1990s and into the year 2000. So it is possible that the Nasdaq reclaims these key levels versus gold and just goes on a huge run versus precious metals. So I am rotating out of a lot of the precious metal stocks that have served me really well this year, and some of those, like CMCL, like Rockhopper, there are some that have done 200, 300, 400% over this year. So I've made incredible gains while the Nasdaq has been relatively lackluster. We've obviously seen a lot of volatility, but year-on-year gains have not been massive. But when I look at what is potentially to come if the Nasdaq reclaims these key levels versus gold, I think we could see something that would catch so many investors off guard. A lot of people are quite bearish now on markets, and understandably so. The economy does look really, really bad, but the charts are telling us that potentially those who are short or flat in the market might be about to get punished. And other clues, you know, so this is the iShares Russell 2000 ETF. So this is an ETF for the sort of mid-cap US stock market. And, you know, again, price action's not been great. Mid-caps largely have underperformed the Mag 7 and the Nasdaq for some time. But look what's happened since we got this big dip back in early 2025. Not only have we kind of had this V bottom out of where we were, but we've now also reclaimed the bottom boundary of this this sort of rising wedge, this rising channel. To me, that looks really constructive, and the fact that we are now taking out these highs and we're breaking out into all-time highs tells me that this potentially has quite a lot further to go, and it's just one more clue in the overall jigsaw for me, which tells me that US equities look good, Chinese equities look good, and the mid-cap and small-cap market is really the place to be. So when I think about some of these stocks, and I know NIO is technically a Chinese company, but it's listed on the US market, this is something I want big exposure to. And likewise, there are other ways that I'm playing the market, which I'll come back to in a bit. So, Chinese stocks look great. The S&P is breaking out into new highs, destroying this 100-year trendline resistance. The Nasdaq looks like it potentially might reclaim some key levels versus gold, which would be a big sign that gold is potentially topping out for a sort of 6 to 12 month correction, and the Nasdaq and tech stocks are going to dominate. And the small and mid cap market just looks outstanding. And you know what? Looking at even something like Nvidia with fresh eyes, I've been trying to call the top on Nvidia for some time. I called it back at the end of 2024. We got this big dip. I thought it was probably over. Recently, lots of people have been calling this a top on the market, a sort of megaphone top, where price was going to get rejected up here and then come back down and do something like this. But there is another way of looking at this, and that is that often megaphone patterns are bullish. They quite often can result in moves to the upside. And if Nvidia was to break above this sloping resistance here, then that would be a bullish break out of this megaphone pattern, and probably means that over the next 6 to 12 months we're likely to see Nvidia go up considerably. I think we could see the market double potentially. If things get really bubbly, we could see a tripling in the price of Nvidia from here. So I think the AI bubble is likely to continue, is likely to destroy early bears, I should say, and potentially deliver some incredible gains if you're on the right side of some of these moves. What does that mean for crypto? Well, here's the weird bit. I'm still struggling to be overly bullish on Bitcoin. I know everybody is calling for much higher. People believe that we're about to get 500,000 Bitcoin, but I still look at this chart and I still can't fight the feeling that this trend line here is still capping price. And if you flick to a monthly view on Bitcoin, is this loading? If you flick to a monthly view on Bitcoin and pull up the RSI, you can see, as I've said before, that price is making new highs, but the RSI isn't. And so momentum seems to be waning into this trendline resistance. And I just have a sneaky feeling that Bitcoin might peak out before equities. And if you take a look at what happened before the last crash that we saw in the market, we saw something very similar. If I pull up the Nasdaq on here, Bitcoin topped out in spring of 2021 and suffered a major dip, while the Nasdaq just continued to press to the upside, and I think went up sort of 20-30% from where it was during the time in which Bitcoin was experiencing a lot of volatility. We had a huge move to the downside, which I think was something like a 50% move over the space of a couple of weeks, and then slowly the market ground back up and took out the recent high before properly rolling over in tune with the Nasdaq. So what am I saying? It wouldn't surprise me to see Bitcoin float around up here, stay relatively flat, potentially get a push into the 130 to 140 region, a sort of wick on the monthly just to take out these highs. But then I could see Bitcoin doing something like this and eventually rolling over before coming back up and making one final high before everything turns sour. Let's see what happens. I think this period here could last a while. So these are monthly candles. I suspect we could have another 2 to 3 months of sideways before we see some of that volatility. But for now, I'm not getting too excited about Bitcoin. And I'll pull up another chart which I think is incredibly underrated, which is this GBTC ETF chart, which mirrors the price of Bitcoin. It's the grayscale Bitcoin trust. And I love this chart because, again, the price action is so clean. You've got these two trend lines which are capping and holding up price. And we're now crashing right into the upper boundary of what looks like a giant rising wedge. And so unless this breaks out convincingly and starts to hold above this level on the monthly, I still think there is reason to be cautious on Bitcoin up here. And, you know, there are lots of historic signs. If you go back, we are entering Q4 of the year after the halving. That historically has been the time in which Bitcoin has topped out. We've seen huge gains over the last couple of years. So I think anybody that's telling you it's early for Bitcoin is probably a bit too optimistic. And sure, if we see a clean break above here and we're holding on the monthly, then I'll entertain the idea that we get some sort of big throw over on this. But for now, I still believe that eventually Bitcoin is going to roll over, and that when equity markets start to go with it, things are going to get really, really bad. Because just to be clearer about where I think we are, this is what I'm expecting for the Nasdaq. So while I'm bullish in the short term, I think we're seeing a sort of gigantic version of the same price action that we saw in the 90s, where we've had 15 years of price bouncing off this uptrend on the Nasdaq, in the same way that we had kind of 5 years of price bouncing off this uptrend on the Nasdaq back in the 1990s. And what followed was this period here, where you just saw a really steep, sharp rise in the price of the Nasdaq. And I think in the space of 6 months or so, the Nasdaq more than doubled, was up by circa 150%. And it would not surprise me to see something similar, where we get a move into 40, 50, possibly even $60,000 for the Nasdaq, which I know would be insane, particularly in such a short window. But it really wouldn't surprise me if we got this kind of blow off top action, and then we got the prolonged correction and really static price action that followed. You got to remember, guys, if you go back to the year 2000, the high that was made on the Nasdaq at about $5,000, $4,800, we went back at that high for another 15 years. We didn't break it for 16 years. So I know lots of people have got interested in markets and investing over the last few years since the COVID crisis. And, you know, we've seen huge volatility, lots of gains if you're on the right side of some of the moves that we've seen. And the printing press has obviously propped up the markets. The devaluation of currency has had a big factor in some of the price action that we've seen. But just don't forget that markets are not always like this. And I know lots of people are expecting these kind of gains to last forever. And I think if we do get this kind of move, it's exactly up here where lots of people get sucked into the market. And people are increasingly being sucked into the market because they're looking and waiting for value, and that value is not materializing. We know that the Schiller PE ratio is up at almost historic highs. The market is grossly overvalued, but that doesn't mean that it can't continue to go up in the short term. The only thing I'd say is if it does, don't assume that that's going to last forever. You know, at some point, the music is going to stop and this is going to get really, really bad. The economy is not in good shape. And when it does get bad, honestly, seeing a decline of 80-90% on the Nasdaq would not surprise me, and would mirror what we saw at the end of the dot-com boom, which incidentally was a much smaller bubble, I think, than the one that we're experiencing now. So there are reasons to be cautious about what the future holds, but in the short term, I think all the technicals are pointing to more upside. But if we do get the kind of moves that I'm projecting, where something like NEO goes up 10x in the space of 6 months, please, 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 just think carefully about what you're doing in the market. For me personally, I'm not here to give you advice, but for me personally, I will be getting out while everybody else is getting euphoric. Right now, there are some really clear entries on some of these equities. But if we do get moves up into all-time highs from where we are now, and if those moves happen at the kind of pace that we saw back in 2020, 2021, I'm going to be exiting before we get the major correction. So look, Bitcoin, I believe there are still reasons to be cautious about Bitcoin, but some of these alts look great. I've been saying for a while now that I expect something like this on Dogecoin. I don't expect the upside to last very long, and I think altcoins are further out on the risk curve and will possibly top out before equities. But if we, this kind of macro bearish pattern, which I think we are painting at the moment, longer term is likely to mean much, much lower prices for some of these altcoins. But in the short term, we've had the breakout of this descending broadening wedge. We've come back up to test this trend line here, which is capped price for quite some time. And once that breaks, and I've been long on Doge since back here, when it breaks, I think price is going to go much, much higher. But I am starting to rotate out of Doge into something else, and I'll come on to that in a minute, which I think is a really, really special opportunity for investors. So let's come back to that. But just to wrap up the kind of crypto market view, this pattern on Doge is so similar to what I'm seeing elsewhere. So this kind of giant broadening ascending wedge, which is normally a bearish pattern, but inside that you've got this broadening descending wedge, which is a bullish pattern. So I think short-term bullish, macro bearish, and it's the same on things like ADA. I expect us to revisit the upper boundary of this trend line that has capped price. I expect we'll get some sort of throw over. We'll take out the all-time high, and that will be the sign for me that the market has topped. And I expect over the coming years, anybody who is long-term bullish on alts is going to get burned. I really do think that we will revisit these lows down here on ADA, Cardano, eventually. And I think the altcoin market will get absolutely obliterated if and when the Nasdaq tops out. But for now, no reason to be bearish on alts. I am extremely bullish. I think over the short term, there are going to be really significant gains to be made. Not the kind of gains that we saw in 2021. If you're looking for the kind of 100x move in some of these coins, I think those days are done, at least for the next 5 years or so. But if you're in the market at the right time and you are long the right projects, I believe that 200, 300, 400% gains on some of these is doable over the next 6 months. But look, guys, you have to reach your own conclusions. I provide the charts and you can work out whether I'm mad or there's something to this. So that is Doge and ADA, and I'm going to wrap up with the chart that I am most excited about in the world right now, and that is the Riot chart. Now, everybody knows Riot as a Bitcoin miner. I think from a technical perspective, this just on a macro level just looks amazing. I mean, you've got this trend line here that has capped price. We seem to have painted this sort of complex head and shoulders pattern. We've broken out of this long and really tedious consolidation that Riot has been in for the last couple of years. And think about it, as Bitcoin's been booming and has been reaching new highs and, up into the dizzy heights of the 120,000s, Riot has been languishing down here. And that's unusual because every time Bitcoin has broken out into new highs previously, you've had a massive breakout on Riot and really big price action in a short period of time. So back here, we got this breakout, and in the space of a few months, we were up 10x. And then a similar story here, a breakout, and we were up 26x in the space of about 6 months. And so I'm looking at this chart and I'm thinking, wow, this genuinely does look incredible right now. This breakout is so clean. And if you visit at Part-Time Charts on X, you'll see that I've charted Riot against everything from gold to Dogecoin. It just looks incredibly bullish against pretty much every other asset I can find right now. And so I'm looking at this chart, and originally my price target was here. I thought we'd maybe take out these highs, swipe this trend line again, and maybe fall over. But I can't shake the feeling that if we are truly entering silly season, if we're going to get the kind of blow off top that we saw in the year 2000 in tech stocks, then why couldn't this do something crazy? I mean, look at what happened when Riot bottomed in the COVID crisis. It was up 126x in the space of about a year. You know, if you were buying in the midst of the crisis in March 2020 and you were selling a year later in February, March 2021, you've done 100x return. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, right, we've got a short window. I don't think the market's going to stay bullish forever, but why couldn't this just really go on a run, break this level, and find itself eating up all of this kind of inefficient move down and coming back into this key support and resistance zone here at about $1,000? And I know that sounds insane. We're talking about 50, 60x gains in a short window. And I will be taking profits along the way, of course. But right now, I just think this is one of the best looking assets in the entire world. And I am trying to position myself to take advantage of that. I think once we start to break these highs here, price action is going to get really, really exciting. And so I've been long for the last couple of weeks. Some of you will know I went long over the summer and then got spooked as we kind of broke back into this range here. But now the breakout looks for real. And I am expecting really, really positive things from Riot in the months and weeks ahead. So I hope some of that was useful. I know it's been a while since I've been back with a video. If you have enjoyed this, if you like the charts, if you like some of my technical analysis, my thoughts on the market, then please do hit subscribe and like, help me grow the channel. And, you know, I know lots of people will be critical because I've been bearish for quite a long time. All I can say is you have to play what the price action shows you, right? So fundamentally, the market does look cooked, but that doesn't mean that it can't continue to go higher. And I have to adjust and pivot in line with what I see. And right now I'm seeing a hell of a lot of breakouts on some really exciting charts. And I just think it is too early to be bearish on this market. But when the time comes, I will happily flip back. For now, I'm long on Riot. I'm excited about what is to come. And I think there are gains to be made. So thank you for joining me, guys. Appreciate the support. Like I say, if you've liked any of this, then please do help me grow the channel. Share this with friends, family, people in your social network. And I will be back with you shortly, hopefully a smaller gap than the 3 weeks or so since I last brought you a video. Have a great weekend.